I only have one video on SQL on my channel, but recently I discovered something very cool about how you can visualize what you're doing in SQL in Jupyter Notebooks. So I'm excited to present to you today how you can use SQLite in Python. We'll do all of it from scratch. First, I'll show you how to create a database file from CSVs. Then I'll show you how to use or read in a database file so you can use it with SQL. And we'll finish off practicing some SQL queries. Let's get into it. First, we need to import SQLite 3 as SQL. I'll also import Pandas, I'll import glob, and from pathlib, I'll import path. These will come into play in the next two steps. So first, let's create an empty DB file. So with path, we'll do sports.db. We'll use the command touch to create an empty file, so .touch. Next, we'll call our DB file with a string with sports.db with sql.connect, db underscore file, just put a timeout of 1000, as con, cursor is equal to con.cursor, and now we have to fill in this database with the CSV file. So for file in glob.glob, sports underscore db is a folder with the CSVs in it, and we'll do df is equal to pd.read underscore CSV. I'll just print that we're adding a table with the file name. I'll exclude the sports underscore db and the CSV with the 10 to the negative 4. And then we do the command df.toSQL with that file. And if it exists, we'll replace it. All right, and you see that it created the tables salaries, scored goals, players, and positions. And we'll get more into what those are later, but it looks like it created our tables just fine, so we'll commit and close. Maybe you already have a DB file, so let's talk about how you would open a DB file to start using with SQLite. Let's create the DB file string sports.db. Same thing as before with sql.connect db file. We'll put a timeout as of 1000, as con, cursor is equal to con.cursor. And now, since this DB file does actually exist, and it does have tables that we already gave to it before we closed it, we can go ahead and just list all of the tables that are inside. Cursor.execute select name from SQLite master, where type is equal to table, and then I'll just print table names for each of those. And you see our tables, the same ones we had before: salaries, scored goals, players, and positions. Alright, so now that we understand how we can get going with SQL, getting the database files read in and or created, I'm going to run through some SQL queries so we can practice together. There's three different parts to SQL queries. Generally, there's the select, from, and then where. Obviously, there's a little bit more to them from that, but that's kind of the structure I like to think about. And I always like to start off thinking about from what tables I need to grab my information first. And then second, thinking about the conditions or filters that need to be applied. And then last, what columns need to be selected. So let's just do some quick queries to just take a look at these tables that we have. So I'll write this query string, and let's just select everything from the salaries table. You see it has a player ID. Let's select everything from the scored goals table. Has a goal ID, player ID, game ID, and the time of the goal. Okay, let's do the next table. Copy and paste players over. Players gives the player ID, the player's first name, their last name, and their position ID. And then last, we have this table called positions, which is just a position ID and the position that they play. So one is a point guard, two is a shooting guard, so on and so forth. So if you haven't guessed, this is all about basketball data. It's just a small little database that we can use for fun and practicing some SQL queries. Suppose we want to find the highest paid player. I'll paste in kind of our main instructions here. This one's pretty simple, so we'll just do it straight up. We want the first name, last name, the max of salaries, and we'll say from salaries, we'll join on players where player IDs match, where player ID matches the salaries of player ID. And the highest paid player in this data set, keep in mind that this is not real data, is Rudy Gobert. What if we want to find the third highest paid player? Well, we'll do the same thing. We'll select the first name, last name, and salary, and we'll join in the same way. Let's do salaries join players where the player ID matches, and we'll order by salary with descending, limit equals 1, and we'll offset it by 2, so that will give us the third highest paid player, and we'll run that, and we get an error. Oh, because I spelt players wrong. So let me fix that. There we go. So Joe Ingles was the third highest paid player. Okay, what about the third lowest paid player? Basically the same thing, but now we don't want to do descending order. So we can just paste that in and change that. And it says that Chris Paul was the third lowest paid player. Again, this is not actual data. Okay, what is the average time of scored goals for each game? Let's create our query string and that special line of code. Like I said before, I like to start with from. So what table do we need? Well, we need scored goals for each game. We'll do from scored goals. We'll group by the game ID because it's for each game ID. And we'll select the average time with the game ID. And I have an error somewhere. Oh, I forgot the D in scored goals. Okay, so there we go. That is the average time of each scored goal for each game. Okay, next, which position scored the most goals? We'll start with from again. We need the scored goals. We need to join that on players. But we also need the positions, so we'll join that with positions, where position ID matches the player's position ID. And then it's as simple as grouping by position, ordering by the amount of scored goals with descending, so the highest one's on top, and then we just take the top one. And we'll select the count of the goal ID and the position. And this tells us that point guards scored the most goals in this data set. Okay, which players never scored? Let me paste that in. And let's start with from, where we need scored goals again. Join that on players, where the player ID matches. And we'll just select everything to get a sense of what's going on first. But now let's group by players, player ID. And now we want to filter for having a count equal to 0. And then we'll select the player's ID and their count of goals. And it looks like that everyone scored. Okay, which player scored the most goals? Query from scored goals, we're going to join players on the player ID. Let's just run that to see what it looks like first. Then we'll group by players by their player ID, and then we'll count who has the most goals that have been scored. And we'll select the first name and last name and the count of the goals. And this tells us that Steph Curry scored the most goals. That's just the amount of field goals that they made, but let's look at who actually scored the most points by summing the different field goals together, because remember in basketball you can score either a 1 with a free throw, a 2 with a normal shot, or a 3 if you're beyond the arc. So if we actually sum this instead of count this, we actually get that LeBron James scored the most points, but again, question asked for the most goals, and Steph Curry hit the most shots. Okay, so which player scored the most goals in a single game? That adds another layer of fun. So we're going to need from scored goals, join players, where the players' IDs match. Then we need to group by two different things. We need to group by the player ID and the game ID, because it's the most goals in a single game. And we'll order by the amount of scores, the sum of the goals. Again, descending, limit equals 1 to get the max, and let's get the person's last name and first name. Some kind of error in here. Oh, shouldn't have that comma. Okay, so Mike Conley scored 17 in a single game. Good for you, Mike Conley. Okay, what is the salary paid per goal per position? So this one's going to be quite fun. I'm going to do this in a few different steps, and hopefully to help you understand a little bit more about nested SQL queries. First, let's get the salary per position. For that, we need the salaries, and I'll natural join that on the players, and I'll natural join that on the positions, and we'll group by position, and we'll select the sum of the salary and the position. And let me just fix that here. Okay, so now we have each position, the total salary for each position, so salary per position. Now I'm going to copy that and paste it, and now we're going to get the goal per position. So instead I'm going to do the count of the goal. I'm going to change the from, because now we need scored goals and players, and we'll join positions on position ID as well. Then we'll keep the group by positions. Okay, so this gives us the number of goals for each position. And now what we want, again, is the money per goals for each position. So I can create a new query down here that's basically going to use the other two as nested queries, where we want the sum of the salary divided by the count of the goal ID. We'll call that salary per goal, and the position. That's what we'll select. We're going to do it from our first salary per position, so that outer layer, salary per position. And we'll natural join that with our other table, which is our goals per position. And then we'll order by the salary per goal, which is our new variable that we're selecting. And there you go. So that is the amount of salary each position got paid per goal. A lot of people I've found get confused with how to perform these nested queries, but I think this is a good example to show you that it's really just a way for you to create a table that's not there to make things a little bit easier. So we created those two tables above, and then we just had to select the sum of the salaries divided by the count of the goal ID. That's how you use nested queries, just to create tables that make your outer queries a little bit easier to do. And sometimes they're very necessary, but there you go. That is an example of how to use SQLite in Python. Again, I was super excited to find out that there's a nice way to do this pd.read_SQL query, because then it shows you exactly what you're creating as your output, the nice Pandas output, and it's great to visualize that in the Jupyter Notebook. I hope you enjoyed this video.